morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is Tuesday and I'm once again joined by Marianne Williamson. So nice to see you, Marianne.
It's always nice to see you, to argue with you, to spar with you. What's on your radar today?
Happy to tell you. Well, I think we will end up arguing about this. USAID is on the chopping block, but all this controversial funding of foreign causes will remain in place unless Republicans work up the courage to oppose the federal spending bill, i.e. the continuing resolution or the CR. Now let me explain. Critics of endless government subsidization of foreign governments and interest groups took heart the other day when Secretary of State Marco Rubio declared that the State Department would be taking over management of USAID and canceling 80-something% of its programs. Rubio said in a statement that this determination had been made after a 6-week review. Quote, the 5,200 contracts that are now canceled spent tens of billions of dollars in ways that did not serve and in some cases even harmed the core national interests of the United States. In consultation with Congress, we intend for the remaining 18% of programs we are keeping, approximately 1,000, to now be administered more effectively under the State Department. Thank you to DOJ and our hardworking staff who worked very long hours to achieve this overdue and historic reform. Elon Musk responded to the statement on X that the cuts were tough but necessary, and he was happy to work with Rubio and always believed the necessary parts of USAID could be handled under the purview of the State Department. So much for the manufactured media narrative that Rubio and Elon can't get along. The New York Times reported recently that they had fought in the Oval Office in front of Trump, which of course got its own hilarious SNL parody.
I can't believe this is the guy you've given access to the entire government. He's not an elected official.
I know you are, but what am I?
Okay, whoa.
Governor!
That's enough.
Ha, 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 ha. You know, maybe, just maybe, Elon and Rubio had some disagreements to work out. They did that, and now here we are. The mainstream media, I guess, just can't understand that Trump's coalition contains an actual diversity of thought, of personalities, and of approaches, and they disagree and debate with each other. And a team of rivals in the style of Abraham Lincoln's cabinet is actually a healthy thing. But I digress. Let's get to USAID. Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency has exposed all sorts of odd, questionable payments to foreign interest groups that simply don't align with the America First policy agenda Donald Trump was elected to implement. Matthew Petty, my colleague at Reason Magazine, explained this in a recent piece detailing USAID funds. He writes, quote, there's a long history of USAID projects, supporting bad actors, fostering anti-American resentment, building an unhealthy dependence on foreign money, and doing more harm than good. He points to USAID inadvertently funding opium production in Afghanistan and even child sexual abuse in Africa. And of course, USAID was responsible for funding research on viruses in Wuhan. That's right, it wasn't just the National Institutes of Health making the sort of research funding grants that now look like a leading possible cause of the COVID pandemic. USAID was, of course, involved as well. Sounds like cutting this program down to size is a perfectly good idea, and I, for one, am glad that Rubio and Elon are working together to accomplish just that. But here's the thing, and this is an important thing. The federal government cannot simply decide not to spend money that Congress has appropriated via legislation. They can delay the spending, they can move it around a bit, but at the end of the day, Congress did vote to authorize this spending. It's Congress that does the legislating, not the president, not the State Department, not Elon Musk. This means that if Republicans really want to support the Trump, Elon, America First agenda, well, then they need to vote for a spending package that specifically cuts funding to USAID. Are they prepared to do that? Absolutely not. Senator Rand Paul, one of a very small number of Republicans who are actually willing to follow through on what the GOP has been promising for decades, has explained this several times. He wrote on X, quote, despite DOJ's findings of loony left-wing USAID programs, the Republican spending bill continues to fund the very foreign aid Elon Musk proposes to cut. The bill continues spending at the inflated pandemic levels and will add $2 trillion to the debt this year. Count me as a hell no. He continued, Rubio canceling woke grants is great, but a legal question remains. Can the administration simply not spend money Congress gave to them? SCOTUS will ultimately decide, but last week they initially upheld a lower court decision that is demanding money be spent. Best way to incorporate DOJ cuts into overspending is for Congress to appropriate less money. Unfortunately, this week, Congress will agree to continue spending at Biden levels. Ugh. Representative Thomas Massie, another principled opponent of big government, added, Rand is correct. I'm a no as well on this CR. And Daniel McAdams, executive director of the Ron Paul Institute, notes that Doge is fake if Congress continues to appropriate money at the same levels as before Doge. It's smoke and mirrors. They are correct. President Trump and Elon Musk and Marco Rubio have done a good job working to align American foreign policy with the actual priorities of voters and to identify and delay reckless spending. But now Congress needs to do its job and actually vote to cancel these giveaways to foreign governments and special interests. If they won't do that, they are worse than useless. They're liars, too. And Marianne, I wish Trump would understand this because he actually was posting on True Social against Thomas Massie recently, calling him a grandstander and saying he should be primaried if he doesn't vote for the CR. But President Trump, if you want this stuff cut, it's got to not be in the CR to happen, or else it's just posting. It's just vibes. It's just placating right-wing people without actually doing anything. And so much of the problem, maybe you're against doing these cuts anyway, but certainly if Republicans say we're going to cut this and then trick people into thinking they're actually doing it, isn't that a problem?
Well, to me, the issue is not the money that's spent or not spent. The issue to me is the mission, the moral core of the humanitarian mission of the USAID. Obviously, there have been abuses. The program that you mentioned where they had inadvertently, as you said yourself, inadvertently funded a program that later was deemed to be a cover for some bad behavior regarding sexual predators of children, all of that. Of course, as soon as they found out, they stopped. There's also been a lot of talk about CIA fronts. All of that needs to be rooted out, absolutely. But clearly, once again, this is not just about cutting out the bad things. This is not just about cutting out the fat. This is about cutting into the bone. This is about cutting out programs that have to do with malaria prevention and tuberculosis, feeding starving people, Ebola. This is the problem that I and many people have. And it was interesting to me when you said that Elon Musk, the program had been sent over to the State Department. We have a Secretary of State. Marco Rubio is someone with whom I have rarely agreed politically, but never before now did I doubt his principles, did I doubt his moral vision for this country and for the world. And so now you have him not only bending his knee, willing to cooperate with things that are the opposite of what he stood for throughout his career. But now Elon Musk, he's like the babysitter of everybody, even the president himself. He says, I look forward to working with Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio needs the babysitting from Elon Musk. I find the whole thing kind of creepy and wrong. And also, I'd like to see, I think the American people, they talk about how much transparency. I don't see a lot of transparency. I don't see any at all. What was actually cut? What was cut? What made the cut so that there are the 1,000 that were kept? I think that there's a much bigger issue here than just the money. The money is secondary to me. What is most important is the humanitarian core of the presence of the United States around the world.
I have, unlike you, I've actually always thought Marco Rubio had absolutely no principles whatsoever, and I've never been a fan of him. And as recently as 2 years ago, I thought he was a major voice for principles that are actually anathema to mine, that were a bad influence on the Republican Party.
May I have an example?
Intervention, more. Go ahead.
No, I just was curious.
He was a longtime supporter of all our disastrous Middle Eastern interventions. He is a continuation of the failed Bush neoconservative agenda. And we agree, probably, if we went through these, I'm sure there are ones we would agree on that were serving they're intended to serve a humanitarian interest. It's not the intention behind it that's wrong. It's the actual result. I mean, the intention of doing research, for instance, on viruses in China is not to create a pandemic that kills us all. It's to come up with therapeutics, or it's to further scientific knowledge. I understand that the intentions are good, but that doesn't matter. What is the result? And if we can't track these things, and the results are that people get hurt, that we fund dangerous research, that we end up enabling terrorism. I mean, there's a humanitarian mission of toppling Saddam Hussein. It's to bring peace and democracy.
That was
to
never
the
a
Middle
humanitarian mission.
Well,
and you and I know that. And once again,
well, that's how it was sold. Who knows what people's? I don't care what the intention is. I'm just talking about the result. The result was not humanitarian. The result was death and destruction of the people who live there, and the emboldening of terrorism. So it doesn't matter what people intend or not.
You are now moving over to Iraq. I could not agree with you more. And I agree. Listen, I don't want to sound like a big supporter of Marco Rubio in terms of the neocon wars or anything like that. Please don't get me wrong. But you are cherry picking. You are saying, yes, but the results are bad. The results are not bad when you're talking about treatment of malaria. The results are not bad when you're talking about Ebola prevention. They're not bad when you talk about feeding starving children. You were just just cherry picking. And by the way, in any program, in anything in the world, you're going to find the bad actors, you're going to find the bad things that need to be cut out. But for you to say about the whole program, all of that stuff, that those humanitarian projects had good intentions, but they had bad results, I challenge you on that, because there are too many instances where clearly life-saving results. There are people who will die because of these cuts. There are people who will die.
Well, I support humanitarian aid. Certainly, is mostly done by private.
Oh, of course you do.
Well, because
Let
I
the
don't think
private
it should be
sector
on
handle
American.
it.
I mean, that is how I
No
feel.
amount of private charity, and I've been very involved in the nonprofit charitable
Well, and
world.
that's wonderful, and I
No
thank you for
amount
your
of
work.
private charity can compensate for a basic lack of social justice.
Maybe people would be more inclined to give to private charity if they didn't think so much of their tax dollars were being confiscated for purposes that were not clear to them.
Oh, I don't think that's what
what I
keeps
would-
people from giving to charity, but it's a nice la-la land view of things.
All right. Well, we'll fight about what you have to say on your own memo, Marianne. We will be getting into that next up on Rising. Stay with us. Marianne, what is in your memo?
Elon Musk, our unelected, unvetted, wannabe dictator, is now pointing his chainsaw at Social Security, a cherished American institution that provides benefits each month for nearly 63 million retired or disabled Americans. And no, not one of the lies the president told us in his speech about Social Security paying dead people is true. Such stories have been thoroughly debunked. So why is Musk doing this? Because he wants to. Because he has a visceral distaste for anything that hints at government helping people, except him, of course. Let's listen to what he told Larry Kudlow on Fox Business News Monday.
The way support in entitlement spending, which is which is most of the federal spending is entitlements. That's like the big one to eliminate, because that's the sort of $500 billion, maybe $700 billion a year.
Not to even mention the fact that Social Security payments were earned by people. The average senior on Social Security makes about $65 a day, while Musk's government contracts bring him in somewhere around $8 million a day. Taking aim at Social Security is nothing short of cruel to the millions of Americans who paid into that system. Yet this is what Elon recently told Joe Rogan. Let's watch.
Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time.
Right, explain that.
Oh, so people pay into Social Security, and the money goes out of Social Security immediately. But the obligation for Social Security is your entire retirement career. So you're paying you're paying like if you look at the future obligations of Social Security, it far exceeds the tax revenue.
Ponzi scheme, indeed. Since 2008, Musk himself has received $38 billion in government contracts. And he made sure that another 220 million of his forced followers saw his diatribe on Twitter. That's what they do. They talk, they smear, and then they act. Just to remind you, this so-called Ponzi Scheme Act was signed into law by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1935. Our 32nd president called it a social insurance plan, paid for by employers and employees, that would safeguard America's elderly against what he called the hazards and vicissitudes of life. Since its inception, 454 million Social Security numbers have been issued over the years. Today, Social Security keeps 2/3 of America's elderly, disadvantaged, and disabled population out of poverty, able to eat, pay their bills, and live lives with a minimum of dignity as they age. And all smears to the contrary, the system works. Social Security has not missed a payday in over 80 years. But being the world's richest man, Musk presumably can't imagine worrying about how he'll support himself in his old age. He's not old enough to have even a hint of what it means when your body begins to break down or your usefulness to the economy diminishes. Musk's giddy rampage through government agencies, from those that protect our parklands, our consumers, our waterways, our medical research, our air safety, our hungry, even our nation's money, displays an almost sadistic callousness towards the everyday lived experiences of other human beings. Musk has even reposted a meme calling Americans who use federal programs the parasite class. Musk at this point is a danger, not only to the effective functioning of our government, but to the spiritual fabric of a country in which our care for one another is the ultimate glue that holds this society together. Why is he doing all this? Well, many suspect that he and the rest of his techno-billionaire authoritarian boy gang essentially want to destroy the functioning of our government so they can privatize, privatize, privatize. Their plan isn't efficient for anyone, except possibly themselves. It will be so much easier to take the whole thing over once it doesn't work anymore anyway. All this is akin to a hostile takeover in business, a morally monstrous technique where a larger company takes over a smaller one and sells off its distressed parts. Musk isn't just cutting out the fat. He's cutting out the bone. To make his case for cuts, Musk has even gone as far as spreading a lie that 20 million people who are dead are on the Social Security payroll. But if he continues to wave his chainsaw at Social Security, it will be cutting into the bone of this nation. It's a billionaire-sponsored coup against the American government and the destruction of our most treasured democratic ideals.
Well,
I can't imagine you agree with any of that.
No, I don't. Look, here's my problem with Social Security, and I think that, I am sympathetic to the plight of poor elderly people, and I would not totally eliminate government or the welfare state. I think Social Security would work best if it was simply a fund to take care of the very poor elderly people. That does not describe all or most elderly people who have more wealth on average than the young people paying into it now. That's the problem. Younger people are forced to pay into it. There's not going to be enough money because people now live longer. More is coming out of the system than is going into it. So you'd have to require people to pay even more into it, and they have no say in the matter. I would rather, and a lot of young people I know would rather say, no thanks, I will save money for retirement in some other way. I don't want to pay into this program. There's no choice in the matter. It is illegal to do that. Is it illegal to say, I would rather not have part of my paycheck confiscated for this program that is paying out to people with more wealth than I have, that I'm not going to see a dime of 50 years from now because there won't be enough money in it? I would, no thank you. Thanks, but no thanks. If people want to pay into this program and have the government save their money for retirement, they can do that. I don't know why they would choose to do it government way instead of just with a bank, but they can't. That would be fine, but it's not voluntary. Well, isn't the freedom, isn't that like core to our DNA that you should have the freedom to choose whether to participate in this confiscatory government program?
Well, you would probably say that about all taxes. But I do remind you that this is money that people earn. This is money that people themselves paid in. And I also want to say to you, this is anecdotal, but it's an anecdotal based on my own life. When I was your age, I sort of couldn't imagine a time when I couldn't produce monetarily and otherwise in a way that would take care of myself in my old age. It's almost like when you're young, you almost can't imagine not being young anymore. So with due respect, I submit to you that perhaps this idea that you've repeated several times, the money won't be there, the money won't be there. There are ways to make sure that the money absolutely will be there.
Oh, by taking more money from young people now.
Taking more money, no, because those young people now are theoretically not even, for the most part, making the kind of money where if you raise the caps, that money would then be given. By the way, I, as someone who has earned the money that would be that cap would apply, raising the cap would apply to me.
Yeah.
I believe that it is part of the government's function to not only protect individual economic liberty and every other kind of liberty, but to show concern for the common good. And so I believe
I don't want to pay more into it, Marianne.
Yeah,
the part of my, when you hit the limit where they stop taking it out of your paycheck, I go, oh God, finally. You're saying you want more of my paycheck every year to go to the, look, I would just rather not participate in it. And I don't have that freedom.
You wouldn't.
I don't have that freedom. The
but
government is
let me tell
forced.
You something. You wouldn't. You wouldn't. But I'll tell you something. If Elon Musk starts going after Social Security, which clearly he plans to, there will be political repercussions.
Well, I noticed
they're going after Medicare. They're going after Social Security. I fully concede
that going after it is unpopular.
Yeah, and he said on there, that the entitlements are the problem because he wants all that money to be sucked up to his rich billionaire friends who will get those tax cuts. You just have no problem with that. You have no problem with just giving the money, giving everything.
I want people to keep more of their
already
own
have
money,
so much.
so I want them to pay less in taxes. But in terms of the if your problem is with him getting money from the government because of contracts, that's fine. How about that be our agreement? We'll get rid of this Social Security Ponzi scheme and no more government contracts for wealthy billionaires. No more. That's the trade. Can we make that trade?
Everybody on their own. Everybody
Sounds
forget
fine to me.
any kind of social compact. Forget government of the people, by the people, and
social
for the
compact
people.
isn't the
Who
point of a
knows
gun.
that?
It's
Who
force.
knows that? You're young, you're beautiful, you're talented, and you're privileged, and you're white. So of course it's easy for you to say all of this. We're going to take care of the country, and we're going to take the moral mission of this country is to make sure that as many people as possible
You and I are
given
both
the opportunity to
fortunate,
thrive.
privileged people. We've been successful in our careers. You've been very successful. Both of us have economic wealth and are not, we are, to be clear, we are both well-off people who have been successful. So we're giving our views not based on our own personal economic needs, certainly.
Well,
right?
you are.
Well,
you are. I'm not. I believe that
neither of us are going to starve either way. I'm just saying,
what?
Neither you or I are going to starve either way. Is just what I'm acknowledging as you're bringing privilege into this.
I realize
we both
how
are
lucky
privileged
I have
people.
been.
I do as well.
I realize how lucky I've been. That's really what the issue is, and I think you're lucky too. And I think we need to think about what our moral responsibility is based on that.
Coming up, Trump's awkward balancing act between Putin and Zelensky. We will discuss. Ukraine hit Moscow with a massive drone strike overnight as Secretary of State Marco Rubio was meeting a high-level Ukrainian delegation for peace talks in Saudi Arabia. The split screen of 2 Russians killed conflicted with Rubio confirming Tuesday that the U.S. may restart intelligence sharing and military support of Kiev. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky avoided a run-in with Rubio, but had a positive meeting with Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, posting, quote, "I am grateful for his wise perspective on global affairs and support for Ukraine." This is Zelensky. "It was especially important to hear words of confidence in Ukraine's future."
On Monday, Elon Musk called Democratic Senator Mark Kelly a traitor after the Arizona senator posted a picture of himself during his visit to Ukraine. Kelly pounced on Musk, posting on X, "Traitor? Elon, if you don't understand that defending freedom is a basic tenet of what makes America great and keeps us safe, maybe you should leave it to those of us who do." Meanwhile, national security analyst and author Joe Cirincione condemned Trump's pro-Putin stance. In his recent Substack, Cirincione tore into what he calls Trump's lies, writing, quote, "After a few weeks of posturing by pretending that he was going to be tough on Putin, Trump has reverted to his natural obsequious position, flattering the murderous dictator and letting loose a torrent of lies about Ukraine, its leaders, and the war." Joining us now to dive into these new developments regarding the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia is Joe Cirincione, a national security analyst and former president of Plowshares Fund, a public grant-making foundation focused on nuclear nonproliferation and conflict resolution. Welcome, Joe. Thanks for being here with us.
Good morning. It's my pleasure.
You know, Joe, the American people do want this war to end. I think the world, for the most part, wants this war to end. And this was one of the promises that the president made, and we've got to end this thing. However, you have strong views about how it ends and what the deeper risks are of getting this wrong. What is your view of how this could be done in a way that is as fair to the Ukrainians as it is fair, hopefully, to the Russians?
Sure. Well, today, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is in Saudi Arabia, which has become the Trump administration's new favored destination for international talks, to basically pressure the Ukrainians to make concessions before negotiations even start. Look, we all agree that this war should end, that there should be a ceasefire, that there should be talks. But what are the purpose of the talks? And that's the crux of the issue. Do you make peace on Putin's terms, or do you try to arrive at a negotiated settlement? The Trump administration position is that we're going to make peace on Putin's terms. Here's what we know about the demands that Marco Rubio is placing on the Ukrainians in the talks today. It's not just, number one, that Ukraine sign a minerals deal that would turn over at least half the assets to to U.S. companies so they could mine the mineral resources of Ukraine and the fossil fuels under its ground. But it's also now, we learned, that they want Zelensky, President Zelensky of Ukraine, to demonstrate he's serious about negotiations by agreeing to, number one, to have elections in Ukraine and to agree to step down. That has been one of Putin's primary demands. Now it's a U.S. demand. And number two, that Zelensky showed that he's willing to concede the territory that Russia now occupies to Russia. Again, that has been Putin's number one demand. It is now a U.S. demand. So the U.S. is bringing pressure on Ukraine to make these concessions before the talk, while there is no pressure on Russia whatsoever. It's all sticks for Ukraine, all carrots for Putin. That is not going to lead to a stable peace. That's going to lead to an unstable situation at best, with continued war in the future.
Well, I guess to address those 3 points, I mean, A, should not the U.S. Try to recoup some financial investment in Ukraine vis-a-vis this mineral deal that actually would involve us in ways I'm concerned about having American greater presence in the country. But then, and the elections thing in particular, should, as we've said, that the stakes of this conflict are existential in terms of democracy and Western values, and we're fighting an authoritarian. Would it not be appropriate for the country to have an election? I mean, the U.S. has elections every 4 years, even regardless of our state of war. I know we've not faced an invasion akin to what Ukraine is facing, but is that such an unreasonable thing? And while I would absolutely, if I could wave a magic wand, certainly return all of Ukraine to Ukraine and have Russia be nowhere in the country and, you know, make Putin disappear, they have conquered this territory, and there's just no reasonable outcome by which they give it back. That no one has. Maybe you have a disagreement there, but I have not heard any actual plan or policy that would result in Russia returning that territory. There's no one has, even the most ardent pro-Ukrainian voice, I don't think, has a plan to win back the territory, either militarily or through negotiation. Is that not the case?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things there. Number one is that many people believe that Putin is in danger of losing this war. The Trump administration position is, and Putin's position is, that he's winning the war, that he just has to hold on. But there are signs of real strain in the Russian economy, in Russia's ability to continue this war. And there are some who believe that should this war continue through the rest of this year, Putin's position would be greatly weakened, which is why he's making such a push to end the war right now. Now, could Ukraine roll back Russian troops with a surge of U.S. and European assistance? It's difficult to see that, but you could negotiate the terms of how much territory Russia would get. Remember, right now, Putin's position is that he deserves not just the territory that Russian troops now occupy, but all of the provinces he occupies. So give him parts of Donetsk and Luhansk provinces that he doesn't now control. He wants those as part of the terms. Here's the problem, though. Even if you make those territorial concessions, what you have is a very unstable situation where the war ends, Russia occupies 20% of Ukraine, and it has time to rebuild its forces to mount a new invasion a few years from now. That's what he did after the invasion of Crimea in 2014. Remember, we had a ceasefire. We held that ceasefire. It started in 2017 and it held for several years. But then in 5 years, he had rebuilt, he had rearmed, he reinvaded Ukraine. That's the scenario you're setting up. That's what worries Europe, which is why our European allies are so against the kind of terms that Putin is demanding and Trump is supporting.
Yes, I tend to agree with you, Joe. However, Trump won this election, and part of what he won on, one of his campaign promises, was he is ending this war. So it is within the purview of his role to determine that we are not allowing it to play out much longer. But you mentioned Europe. Europe obviously does not agree with Trump on this, and this is recalibrating our relationships with Europe. Europe is now seeing the United States as sort of going over to the other side, in with the bad guys, Russia and others. What do you foresee happening now? I know they're going to have, you were talking about the meeting in Saudi Arabia with Marco Rubio and Ukraine, but also the Europeans are meeting this week. I know Keir Starmer is running all of that. What do you foresee happening with European reaction here? And how will that make a difference?
Well, this is actually excellent point. This is actually the bigger story because Ukraine is sort of the current issue, but it's happening in this massive geopolitical earthquake that has happened in just the last couple of weeks, where it's become clear that President Trump is switching sides, that he's abandoning the Western alliance, American leadership of the West, in order to form an alliance with Putin. That's his goal. That's what he wants. In order to do that, he has to get rid of this irritant, which is Ukraine, which is why you see the president pressuring Ukraine to make these concessions. He wants to end the war and get on with his bigger alliance. But it's not just me that's saying this. This is the view of the U.S. national security community. I was just at a conference on foreign relations meeting last week, and it was nearly uniform that Trump is abandoning the Western alliance. We have not done anything like this in the 75 years that NATO has existed. And what does that mean? That means that European leaders are understanding that they can no longer depend on U.S. security guarantees. That greatly weakens NATO, the longest running and most successful national security alliance in history, and that they have to defend their own resources. For example, the man who will be Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, just said after he won the election 2 weeks ago that his number one priority was to strengthen Europe so that they could achieve true independence from the United States. A German chancellor has never made a statement like that, at least not since Hitler was defeated.
But
this is a massive swing where people cannot feel they can no longer depend on U.S. national security, so they have to build up their own resources, which is probably a good thing, but that might include nuclear weapons, with both Germany and Polish officials now talking about starting their own nuclear weapons programs. That's a recipe for nuclear proliferation and instability throughout the globe.
Just real quickly, because then we'll have to run, but I mean, I'm glad you acknowledge that. I know many Americans probably would say it would be a good thing for Europe to pay a greater share of the defense for what's happening in their own backyard, especially as we have, you know, pressing matters to look at in the other direction on the earth, with China becoming such a threat. Can we, you know, can the U.S. afford to be taking care of Europe to this degree? I know Europe contributed, you know, millions to the defense of Ukraine as well, but they're kind of, we're an equal partner in this sort of thing. Many Americans feel like they've, you know, been taken advantage of, and that Europe really should be. And then also Europe remains totally reliant on Russian energy exports. And if they were really serious about combating Russia, they'd do something about that, which is something Trump has warned about for years.
Yes, well, they are cutting their energy independence, so that's going to take some time. But yes, and they are increasing their defense spending, but that's going to take some time. Those are two positive things you want to see happen, but not at the expense of abandoning the Western alliance. Our greatest strength in the world is the worldwide alliance systems that we have, so we don't have to fight alone. So we're not waging these battles alone. Russia has nothing like this. China has nothing like this. And here you see Trump throwing it away, just as in the first 7 weeks, he's also disarmed the United States by abandoning our economic assistance programs, our foreign aid programs. Countries have problems. We give them money to solve those problems. They have good relations with us in order to preserve those income streams. These are two incredibly important tools of U.S. national security strength. Trump is abandoning them. Why? Because he wants to have an alliance with Vladimir Putin. There aren't many national security experts who would agree with that calculation.
Well, obviously, this is the end of the post-war era as we knew it. This is a geopolitical earthquake, and thank you so much, Joe, because you are an important voice guiding us through all this and explaining to us its larger meaning. So thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Next up, why mainstream media has no sense of humor. We'll discuss. Stay with us. Vice President JD Vance has taken X by storm lately. There have been countless memes of the vice president floating around, and they depict him, oh my God, I love this. They depict him in very absurd ways as to how it all started. The Atlantic writes that in October, an X user wrote, "For every 100 likes, I will turn JD Vance into a progressively apple-cheeked baby." After Vance's spat with Zelensky, more baby-faced memes surfaced. But is the Atlantic misunderstanding this entire phenomenon? An article titled, "Wait, who is posting those unflattering JD Vance memes?" The outlet writes, "It wouldn't be the first time that politicos have tried something like this. The dark-branded memes of Joe Biden and the coconut-pilled memes of Kamala Harris initially started out as right-wing attempts to denigrate the Democrats. Dark-branded caricatured Biden's reputation on the right as a doddering old man by imagining that he harbored a secret personality as a cold-blooded killer.
The article continues, quote, "The Vance memes might work against the vice president even more. There is no silver lining to looking like a doofus. As trivial as they might seem, memes about politicians can be telling. Whether or not they consciously realized it, by spreading such memes, liberals were copping to some uncomfortable truths about the politicians they supported."
But Vance himself has acknowledged the memes. Blaze reporter Julio Rosas tweeted, "Landed back at Joint Base Andrews with Vice President Vance. I can confirm VP Vance has seen many of the memes edits of his pictures and thinks it's a funny trend."
Substacker Denny Carter wrote on Blue Sky, "I guess VP is not all that demanding of a job since Vance seemingly scrolls right-wing memes 12 hours a day every day."
And author Selena Zito wrote on X, "Oh dear, I did not expect our cultural divide to be this big in that the writers at The Atlantic don't get the Vance meme fun. No one's trying to make him look like a doofus. In fact, it's the opposite of trying to make him look like a doofus." Look, they're funny, and he thinks they're funny. And I think there's a proud history, tradition in this country of political satire, of editorial cartoons, mocking the appearances and habits and mannerisms of our presidents, of our leading political figures. This is well within that American First Amendment tradition. I think the memes are really funny. I was chuckling at them as they were appearing on screen. JD Vance must have a sense of humor about himself because he thinks they're funny too. He's shared some of them. And I think it's a good thing. And we can look for deeper meaning, but I think The Atlantic was really misunderstanding this. And I don't always dislike The Atlantic. They sometimes have some perceptive commentary, but this is not an effort to make him look like a doofus by right-wing people. It's just like right-wing people can sometimes laugh at themselves. And sometimes left-wing people can too, and media people, but...
You and I completely agree on this one, actually. This goes back all the way to the founding.
Yeah.
This goes back to cartoons about Thomas Jefferson. So there's enough serious stuff going on in the world. I would take any opportunity to laugh and find something amusing. So on this one, we get to say absolutely, get over yourself if you have a problem with this one.
And I thought some of the dark, not so much the coconut pilled was a little... Kamala stuff was a little cringe and a little manufactured because we didn't have enough time maybe to understand her personality, or just she had difficulty transmitting a personality when she was discussed. The dark Brandon memes I thought were pretty hilarious actually, because it started right as I think it actually started as like a Chinese anti-Biden thing that was then appropriated by Biden people. It was amusing enough, and but there has to be something genuine about it. Right now, I think a problem the Democrats have is they're trying to copy some meme formats, and it just comes off as insincere and cringe. Like with the ladies doing the Super Smash Brothers pose. Did you see that one?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't like the worst thing ever, but there was just something not sincere about it. It's like, it's not funny when you do it, mom trying to be cool with the cool kids. Do you know what I mean? That's the vibe the Democrats manifest too often. That oh no, we're cool. Look at us, we're cool, and it's just not sincere.
I don't like it when I agree with you sometimes, but I must be honest because I think you're really right about that one.
All right. Well, I don't think we have much more to say about this subject, but next up on Rising, an explosive expose. What happens behind the scenes after then-candidate Trump was shot in Butler, Pennsylvania. We will discuss. The most American picture I've ever seen. That was President Trump's takeaway from the now iconic photo taken seconds after his assassination attempt at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th. The shooter, 19-year-old Matthew Crooks, was fatally shot on site. Trump lived, and the moment will forever be etched in history. Axios reporter Alex Eisenstadt was in the hospital room where Trump was transferred to after the shooting. That came within millimeters of taking his life, a moment that would certainly make it into his forthcoming book about the president, which is titled Revenge.
In an excerpt published in Vanity Fair, Eisenstadt meticulously recounts the day, down to the minute, from all the players involved, from Secret Service, now White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, to campaign spokesman Steve Chung. Eisenstadt captured the post-shooting frenzy, including how Trump saw the tragedy in terms of politics and posterity. Joining us now to tell us more is Alex himself, a senior political reporter for Axios, who got a look inside. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So what I found so interesting about the reporting from your book that has now been published is in real time Trump kind of realizing what a winning political moment this was going to be. Obviously, it was a horrifying incident, and he was reasonably fearful for his life, and someone died and other people were injured. So there's certainly a seriousness and a solemn note to the moment. But realizing that it was going to end up being a very an advertisement for him because he looked there was just something respectful about what he did.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. Just one quick note. I wasn't actually in the hospital, but I talked to people who were in the hospital with him that day. But one of the things that was interesting was that Trump realized at this moment he had an instinctive understanding of how this moment connected to those of his supporters. His supporters saw him as an ascendant figure, as an underdog fighter, and they very much connected with that throughout the campaign. The moment Trump was shot, he raised up his arm and said, "Fight," because he knew that his supporters would see that as something they could connect with, this underdog who was under duress, who was under attack, who was under threat. He knew that this was a moment he could connect with his supporters, and they would connect with him with.
And not just his supporters, frankly. I mean, I think, didn't Mark Zuckerberg called him after, seeing that photo, has said in interviews that it was badass, that it was, part of, not obviously the entire story because he has business reasons to be closer now to, or more proximate to the Republican Party, but that was part of his motivation for trying to repair, mend fences in the personal relationship with Donald Trump.
It was a moment that appealed to a lot of different people. And if you look back on it, it was one of the moments that may have helped seal the election for Donald Trump. When you look back on things, one has to wonder if Trump was ever going to lose the election after the shooting. It was a moment that riveted the country, that made people see Trump in a new light. It was a moment that everyone thought Trump handled very well.
And then what happens in the immediate time period after Trump? You've talked to people at the hospital. So Trump is recovering from this gunshot wound, the injury to the ear. He's watching the social media reaction in real time as people are coming to him. And what was their strategy moving forward?
There was just complete chaos in the hospital. People were trying to figure out what was going on. People closest to him, including Susie Wiles, didn't know Trump's condition when they first sped off for the hospital. There was a lot of confusion. And so when Trump goes through to his room, when he's in the hospital, he's stretchered into his room, his tie is off, his shirt is very bloody, his shirt is also off, he's only in an undershirt. His shoes have been left at the site. His shoes wouldn't have been retrieved until later in the day. And so at one point, while he's in the hospital, Trump asked for his CAT scan results because he tells a nurse that he wants those results to be released so that way he can have the results compared to that of Joe Biden's. So he was thinking about politics from the very beginning when he was in the hospital that day.
Did anybody mention anything at all about the fact that there was a man who did die? I mean, I certainly am grateful, as every American, that the president was okay. Of course, it's a horrifying incident. This is not in any way to minimize the tragedy of the fact that someone tried to assassinate him. But there's such a minimal mention of the fact that a man did die, and the fact that the team went immediately into political strategy and how this might connect with his base as opposed to a more human reaction of, oh my God.
Well, they did have a memoriam for the person who died.
They had a memoriam, but we are talking about what happened there. We're talking about what Alex has reported is what the president said first and foremost, as opposed to, is everybody okay? Was anyone hurt? It's just my feelings, and that would be my feeling whether it was a Democrat or a Republican. I find that just where we have come to as a society, politics before the fact that someone died here, that's just my feelings.
Trump did ask about his one of the camera people who took one of those famous pictures of him. He wanted to know how they were doing. Trump was concerned about how other people were faring. And he definitely took a lot of interest in the family of Cory Comparatore, who is one of his supporters who was killed. So, look, Trump has taken a lot of interest in what happened to people who were impacted that day in the months after, for sure.
Well, that's good to know, and I'm glad to hear it.
What do you think about Trump's fear for his then there was the incident at the golf course shortly thereafter where there was someone hiding in the bushes. Do you think, or based on you talking to people in his orbit, does Trump go from rally to rally or public meeting to public meeting thinking that he could be in imminent peril? Was this like a wake-up call? Was it, no, he fully expects something like this to eventually happen? Was it, oh my God, how could this happen? How could the security be so lax? I wonder if you have any insights into his mindset. Yeah. Does he think that he's such a high target that, yeah, it could happen every time he steps off the plane?
It definitely became something that he was thinking about a lot more after this incident. The morning after the shooting, he was talking to a former aide. And he told the aide that the bullet was within a hair of, if it had hit him, his brain would have exploded like a watermelon on live television. It was something that definitely impacted him in the weeks to come when there became increasingly concerns about Iran trying to attack his plane. He thought about it a fair amount. He was asking about the staging of his events and what his visibility would look like there. So we definitely thought about these things much more after the Butler shooting.
It is still, I mean, it's surreal that it happened. Like, I know that it happened, and it's not unusual or uncommon for a high-profile celebrity or political figure to face an assassination attempt. This happened to several of it didn't happen to our recent presidents, but it happened to Reagan and others. Obviously, several presidents have been assassinated, so there's nothing necessarily uncommon about it. But for it was like a moment from a piece of entertainment, from TV or movies, that it would be that it would graze his ear and be within a millimeter or however of actually killing him, of actually ending the life of the former president, the likely next president, at the same time that the president and Joe Biden was about to actually step down from running. We could have had a total transformation in who was actually running to be president in a short amount of time. Like, that sounds like an implausible movie script that we actually witnessed it happen.
We had
go ahead.
Well, we have the iconic photo of President Reagan coming out of, I think it was the Hilton Hotel, obviously the iconic photos of the Kennedy assassination. All Americans of goodwill, no matter what our politics, were very concerned after this incident that the Secret Service was obviously very lax. And a lot was talked about at the time, and I don't think any of us ever felt that was totally closed. How did that even happen? How is it that someone had seen this young man? Someone had actually mentioned that he was on the roof. The fact that he even was able to shoot that gun, something went terribly wrong, and I certainly hope that the kinds of changes that needed to be made after that incident have been made.
And that's a question for you, with all the concerns in kind of MAGA online conservative media world about the performance of the Secret Service. Was that an immediate concern among Trump and his inner circle?
At that moment, it was just about getting the president to safety. When they were preparing to leave the hospital that day, they had three different, the Secret Service came to them and said, we have three different options. Either you go to Bedminster, you go to Milwaukee where the convention's about to be held, or you go back to Mar-a-Lago. They eventually picked Bedminster. So there was immediate concern about what they do going forward. Sean Curran, who is the head of Trump's detail and who is now the head of the Secret Service, he actually went to Trump's aides and said, look, I'm going to get blamed for this. I'm going to get thrown under the bus by senior Secret Service leadership. That's kind of what ended up happening. The Secret Service leadership went to Susie Wiles and said they wanted to put Sean Curran, they wanted to put him on leave for a bit. And she said, no, you're not doing that. So there was some scrutiny into Secret Service for sure in the hours after this event happened. But one of the things I also go into in this chapter is that there had been plenty of security run-ins for Trump in the months and weeks leading up to Butler, including an incident when he went to Iowa. Trump went to Iowa to visit a college frat house, and Secret Service in the day before Trump made that visit went to the frat house and found a room that was filled with guns. Those guns had to have been locked away before Trump could appear the next day. That was just one example of several security scares that Trump had before Butler even happened.
Well, even under the best of circumstances, the president we know in the modern era, there are threats against the life of the president under normal circumstances. I know under Obama, he had 3 times the amount. So this is just a terrible reality of our current state of affairs, and let's just hope that Secret Service has it together. The last thing this country needs now is anything more like this. So God bless everyone involved.
Alex Eisenstadt, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up next, more Rising. Stay tuned. You spend a lot of time on social media. I do. You might have noticed yesterday that Elon Musk's X was down for a while. It's pretty annoying. I was trying to use it to prepare for the show. Here's Musk on Kudlow's show discussing the situation.
There was a cyber attack on X today, which shut it down and may have been foreign sourced.
Yes.
It's a big story. You want to give us a moment on that?
Well, we're not sure exactly what happened, but there was a massive cyber attack to try to bring down the X system with IP addresses originating in the Ukraine area.
Oh, well, so that's your suspicion. Is the website, is the internet up? Is it up yet?
It's up, yeah.
It's up yet. Okay, good.
Earlier in the day, Musk had tweeted the following. There still is, a massive cyber attack against X. We get attacked every day, but this was done with a lot of resources. Either a large coordinated group and/or a country is involved.
According to a Telegram post, though, pro-Palestinian cyber hacking group Dark Storm Team took credit for the attack. Also, cyber attackers sometimes use fake or inaccurate IP addresses to make them harder to trace, meaning that the attackers might not have been in Ukraine.
Tesla's shares also fell by more than 15% yesterday, which was the lowest since before Election Day. There have also been protests around the country and in Europe against Musk and Tesla. Police say there have been instances of vandalism, arson, and gunshots.
Broadcaster and author James O'Brien wrote on Blue Sky, "Seriously, who would cyber attack Twitter? All of the USA's enemies must love what it's become under the bedwetter."
Senator Mike Lee responded to the news writing this, "Not cool. I wonder which government-funded NGOs might be involved." So this Palestinian group took credit for it. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were the group that caused it. We don't know and should look into that. I don't know that it was government-funded NGOs either. I don't know who did it, and whoever did it, they're very bad, and they should not do that.
Genius engineer, owner of Twitter, of all people, Elon Musk knows that at the time that he spoke to Kudlow, there was no way to know where those attacks came from. He used that as an opportunity to say, yes, it came from Ukraine. He did that purposely. He knew that at that point there was no way to know. IP addresses saying they came from Ukraine. So, listen,
Well, that's an
people,
indication that they could have come from Ukraine, is it
Yeah,
not?
but the way he said it, yes, all indications they came from Ukraine. He knows better
Well, he didn't say
than that.
Zelensky did it. He said there's indications it was from Ukraine.
Okay.
Yes.
His beef is with Ukraine, not just with Zelensky. The issue is how many people in this world are so angry at Elon Musk. So there's a bigger story here than just the attacks on Twitter, or X, which, as he himself has said, those efforts are made every single day.
Yeah.
But also the report mentioned
Facebook has gone down for periods of time.
absolutely,
It just happens.
Hackers exist, and
Yeah.
it happens. But also, the report was mentioning the vandalism, the stock prices going down. People have signed bumper stickers, "Make America a country where it wasn't embarrassing to own a Tesla like it is now." People are angry at Elon Musk. In this country, people are angry at Elon Musk. And for those of us who don't like what is happening with Doge, the anger is understandable. I'm not saying that excuses or justifies a hack of X, but I am saying that the larger story in my mind is the fact that many people are expressing absolute rage. When you have someone who's about to take his chainsaw to Social Security, to Medicare, we will see more and more acts of outrage, hopefully functional, hopefully healthy expressions of outrage, but they will be coming, mark my words.
That sounds like a threat. Continue to cut government and prepare for more cyber attacks?
No,
Is that what we're
continue to
saying?
cut life-saving programs that people need, such as Medicare and Social Security.
I did my radar on this yesterday, and people according to polls, CNN broke this news to Harry Enton, who's the CNN pollster, who is fabulous, broke this news to his colleagues. They were shocked that according to polls, majority, slim majority, not a super majority by any stretch of the imagination, but majority of people like what Elon and Doge is doing, agree that the cuts are not to vital social services, but to waste, fraud, and abuse. They have greater support than Trump himself got in the popular vote. So I think there are people who are not necessarily Trump supporters who are nevertheless saying to themselves, you know, I'm glad a chainsaw is being precisely taken to the government.
You know, this is the problem, or this is the question I have for you, Robbie. There is deep corruption in Washington. We're here in the middle of it all.
Yes.
That corruption has to do with the corporate lobbying by insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, chemical companies, agricultural companies, big oil, gun manufacturers, military-industrial complex, the billions of dollars that these people spend on this, what is basically a system of legalized bribery here in this town. That's where the corruption is. All this is going on with firing federal workers, people who take care of parklands, people who take care of consumer protection, which I know you're not a fan of, people who do medical research. This is a deflection. This is like a steal the purse technique so that people don't look over there. This isn't taking on the deep corruption.
I agree with you that there is deep corruption. The leaders in many of those industries, pharmaceutical industry, insurance industry, energy, etc., you're right that they use their connections to government regulators to get favorable conditions for their companies versus other firms. Now, we disagree on what the solution to that is. You say the solution is even more regulators, and I would say,
don't tell me. When you start talking about what I think, that doesn't work for me.
Well, let me tell you what my solution is then, and then you can tell me what your solution actually is. My solution is to make the power that those lobbyists and those regulators and those elite, well-connected people have to lessen that power by opening them up to more competition, saying the rules are going to be minimal so that the market can do its work, so that you can fight the big guy. They're going to have to compete with rival firms instead of gaming the system with their insider knowledge. The more you try to regulate, the more you craft consumer financial protection type rules, the more the better connected lobbyist type person gets favorable treatment for that big insurance company or pharmaceutical company or social media company. And I'm saying that doesn't work. Regulating ever and ever tighter just gives them more power, and that's what I'm against.
I didn't even say the word regulation.
All right.
It is true that you and I don't agree on the issue of regulations. However, the issue here is money, the undue influence of money on our political system. That's the cancer underlying all the cancers. What we need is to repeal Citizens United. Citizens United was a Supreme Court decision that gave unlimited power for dark money given by corporate forces, given by those like Zuckerberg, given by those like Bezos, given by those like Musk. Let's not forget, Musk spent $277 million to help Donald Trump be elected. That's what you want to get rid of corruption? You get rid of the fact that billionaires like that can give that kind of money. Musk, you can see it on his face. He thinks, well, I bought this government. It's mine. So let's take on the corruption, but let's know where that corruption is. And it doesn't have to do with firing heartbroken, traumatized people who have given their lives. It's not just that how are they going to get another job? In some cases, they already have. The issue is that these people were there with a mission. The fact that they had been villainized and demonized as though all of them were people who were the deep state. So what, you're going to replace, my friend Sylvia Hayes calls it, they're replacing the deep state with the dark state. Something dark is going on.
We've argued about that before. Let's actually go back to, just because we haven't argued about it yet, this money speech thing.
Okay.
Look, I hear your point, but Citizens United was fundamentally about whether a anti-Hillary Clinton advocacy group could publish a film that was critical of her. That was, and the campaign finance laws tried to say, no, you couldn't do that. And the Supreme Court said, well, obviously you can. That's speech. Just as you could write a book criticizing Hillary Clinton. They said, well, no, it's too close to the election. You can't do that. Obviously a First Amendment violation. Money is speech. The most important thing that Elon Musk did to help Donald Trump get elected, I would argue, wasn't even the $100 million or $200 million in campaign contributions. It was the purchase of X and the boosting of conservative speech you disagree with, which is fine, but you concede, obviously, they have a right to make. You have a right to broadcast pro-Trump messages on Twitter, and that's the thing. Money is speech. It's hard to control the difference there. You have the right to spend money to promote a political message. That's the difference.
You have said 2 or 3 times in the last few minutes, in a very declarative way, money is speech.
Well, that's what the Supreme Court decided.
Yes, the Supreme Court said it. But there was a time when slavery was legal in this country. There have been plenty of times when the Supreme Court has said something, and years later we look back at that and see it as one of the worst decisions ever made by the Supreme Court. The idea that money is speech is one of the most un-American views ever held, and certainly one of the most un-American foundations for any of the Supreme Court decisions in our nation's history.
Well, I don't agree. I don't see a way to get around that. Now,
You elect somebody, and we ultimately, I don't know when it will happen, it won't be anytime soon, where we have a Supreme Court that comes back to its senses.
I want to give rich and powerful people less incentive to give money to political causes because the political system has less power to break up or destroy rival firms. That was how I solved that problem. If there are lower stakes to politics, if it's not some winner-take-all system where there's going to be some vast new network of oversight, regulation, or whatever it is, then they will spend less money on but it is so important. We got to know whether AI will be free to proliferate. So of course, billionaire wealthy firms are willing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on that policy. If there was not going to be, if it was going to be up to free enterprise to determine, then there wouldn't be anything to spend money on.
You say you want to give them less incentive. I want to give them less power. We're supposed to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It has become of the billionaires, by the billionaires, and for the billionaires. That is wrong.
Well,
and it dismantles the basic social contract between the American people and our government. Everyone here, everyone's voice is supposed to matter in an equal way. You know, the late Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said, you can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. He was right. He was right when he said it, and history has proven him even more right than he was when he did.
Well, it doesn't make that. I mean, Hillary in 2016, Hillary spent more money than Donald Trump did.
Had more money.
Doesn't make
absolutely.
At the end of the day, it can't change your vote. It's not mind control.
Well,
they don't own your vote. You own your vote.
But you're absolutely correct, and that's an important issue for Democrats to realize. Yeah. And at the same time, that's not an excuse for the unbelievable corruption by which big money has bought the U.S. government. We got to fix that,
I
Robbie.
think Democrats think if they just had less money being spent in politics, that would then be automatic success for them.
No, it has to do more with standing on our principles, returning to the basic issue of unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States. The problem in the Democratic Party was Democratic elite who believed that you don't need your principles so much as long as you have enough money.
As long as you have more money
They
than the
were
other guy.
wrong.
Well, that part of it we agree on. Up next, there is more chaos at the Washington Post. We will discuss. Drama at the Washington Post is just unrelenting. In the long line of recent resignations, longtime columnist Ruth Marcus added her name to the list on Monday. Why? Marcus said she wrote a column criticizing owner Jeff Bezos' move last month to shift the opinion page to focus solely on free markets and civil liberties. Marcus alleged that CEO and publisher Will Lewis killed her column. In her resignation letter, Marcus wrote, Jeff's announcement that the opinion section will henceforth not publish views that deviate from the pillars of individual liberties and free markets threatens to break the trust of readers that columnists are writing what they believe, not what the owner has deemed acceptable. Will's decision not to run the column that I wrote, respectfully dissenting from Jeff's edict, something I have not experienced in almost 2 decades of column writing, underscores that the traditional freedom of columnists to select the topics they wish to address and say what they think has been dangerously eroded. But wait, there's more. Axios reported yesterday that the Post was overhauling its entire newsroom structure. The Post is dividing up its national desk into 2 parts, one focusing on politics and government, the other focusing on national reporting. Executive editor Matt Murray wrote that politics and government coverage remain a central pillar for the Post. The national desk will focus on covering important issues and figures outside of Washington. Murray wrote on Monday, quote, "It is time of change across the Post, including for our colleagues in the company, and in opinion, this is a big effort involving all of us, and it is disruptive. There will be some confusion, even some mistakes. Candidly, I realize it may not be for everyone." Drama at the Post kicked off right before the election after Bezos chose not to run the editorial endorsing then presidential candidate Kamala Harris, and it ramped up when the tech billionaire cozied up to President Trump at the inauguration. Meanwhile, Semaphore reports Monday that the New York Times was also making big changes. The Gray Lady is apparently shaking up its opinion section. Per Semaphore, senior editors and publisher A.G. Sulzberger is debating whether they should publish fewer editorials that are, in their view, higher quality. New York Times is also weighing whether it should endorse candidates in more races. It has also tasked staffers like editor Bill Brink, the graphics team, to rethink what an endorsement looks like. 2020 Free Press founder Barry Weiss left the New York Times. In her resignation letter, she said that the outlet's views are concerns were, quote, profoundly removed from the lives of most people. Moreover, that same year, Senator Tom Cotton had written an op-ed for the Times titled "Send in the Troops." It was a reference to the 2020 riots after the death of George Floyd, who had, of course, died in police custody. And after much scrutiny, the Times issued an editor's note saying Cotton's piece did not meet their standards. The incident led to opinion editor James Bennett stepping down. Jonathan Last, editor of The Bulwark, wrote on Blue Sky, "Every honorable journalist at the Washington Post is in an untenable position as long as Will Lewis remains in his job." That's the liberal verdict. Political commentator John Podhoretz, on the other hand, wrote on X, "However, will America survive without the constant whining of Ruth Marcus in the pages of the Washington Post?" Which is an attitude a little closer to my own. I was no particular fan of Ruth Marcus, although she was not my least favorite Washington Post columnist. That, of course, a distinction that belonged to dear, dear Jennifer Rubin, who left before all of this went down. I've said when I covered this previously that, Jeff Bezos does own the paper, so he can do what he wants with it. And look, I think people, employees should be free, obviously, to weigh in and express their ideas, and that's an important facet of what we do. There are not all that many employers out in the world who are going to let you just, pontificate against the person who pays your paycheck and is going to keep doing it, right? That's just the reality.
Very predictable of you to see it that way, Robbie. Of course, you think that ownership is everything. I think that the ethics, especially in journalism, is a big thing. You're not a fan of Ruth Marcus. Let me tell you what I'm not a fan of: outright oligarchy, and that's what we're talking about here. The bigger story has to do with the relationship between Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post between the time that he bought it and how he behaved for several years versus this way that so many people have changed. People who took a much more straight up attitude about the rights of Americans, who all of a sudden, because they have some proximity to power, because of their own business interests in terms of Donald Trump and his approval, have just changed on a dime. And that is what has happened to Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos used to be out and proud about the fact that, hey, what the paper does is what the paper needs to do. As the owner, I'm not going to meddle. And that is the ethical relationship between the owner of a paper like that and the newsroom. And it's very sad to see what's happening, and I totally support the ethical voices of those. Oh, you're smirking. You're smirking at the idea. Oh, yes, you are.
You have an ethical obligation to purchase something and then have no oversight over how it operates?
When it comes to something like major newspapers in the country, yes, it has been an established tradition and ethical principle that those who are the owners of newspapers such as that will take a hands-off approach.
That's not true. Think of yellow journalism. A right to their opinion.
But this is
William
more than
Randolph. There has always been incredible direction from the people in charge and the owners and the business interests of the news. That has always and in every instance.
This is not to say there should be no influence. This is not to say there should be no opinion. But the way he is acting now, actually saying that there will be no opinion pieces that don't support personal liberties and the free market.
He didn't say there'd be no opinion pieces. He said that would be the opinion of, that would be the editorial voice of the page. I mean, the New York Times, the Washington Post, newspapers have an editorial that speaks from the paper's position, which obviously is ideological. So that's going to be the position of the owner. He's in favor of, he says, personal liberties and free markets. That happens to be my ideology, so I think it's good to promote those things. If he's going to decline to run, just guest opinion pieces that are on some other topic, yeah, I would certainly. That doesn't make sense to me. That just sounds kind of boring. I would criticize that as well. This wasn't declining to run an opinion piece on some dissenting. That was declining to run criticism of the paper itself, which is a facet of basically every. I mean, the New York Times doesn't and never has printed, is going to print like a criticism of itself necessarily. I mean, there's sometimes you have a public editor, right, who has that role exactly, and they do that.
Well, a lot of people have resigned already in protest of this, and I think it's important that the American people recognize this is an issue of oligarchy. This is the issue of what happens when billionaires can have, with their money, so much power in so many sectors of our society that other voices simply cannot get in.
Well, let me say one other thing that I think you will agree with.
Okay.
Let this then be an advertisement for independent media and the new opportunities that have arisen for journalists, reporters, entertainments, content creators, influencers, whatever you want to call them, to be free of this kind of oversight or control, whatever you want to call it, and just post, write, speak, do video directly on social media or on a platform like Substack or Rumble that makes very explicit guarantees to the people on it that we're not going to muzzle you even if we hate what you're saying. And that has been allowed to flourish in our new internet economy. And while I'm doing a show that's part of a large corporate media organization that gives me tremendous freedom that I'm very grateful for, I'm encouraging and happy about this trend that allows people to express dissenting views and not have the exact kind of problem we're describing. Because I agree with you, it can be a problem. And that's a good thing that has only existed in recent times. This power was not available previously, and that is a good thing, is it not?
Absolutely. I certainly agree with you that the rise of independent media does matter for exactly the reasons you said. But that, to me, does not mean that we should not be concerned about the ethical principles involved in the legacy media as well. And we all know what's going on here with Jeff Bezos, his sucking up to the president in a way that he was not known to do before. And that's not only him, it's also Zuckerberg. It's the trend these days. Proximity to power, particularly with the Trump administration, given that Trump makes his feelings known about things that presidents traditionally do not make their feelings known about. He doesn't care about transgressing the norms and the traditions.
President Biden was happy to order around, particularly the social media companies. I've talked about it so much. Was furious with editorial choices or lack thereof that social media
about
companies
COVID.
Railed against them all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that was unfortunate. And Trump maybe has taken that ball and run with it. And
run with
I think he should not do that. But
way down the field.
Yeah.
But we'll see what
Biden doesn't
happens.
move
In the
that
meantime,
fast.
everybody be aware. Billionaires simply should not have this kind of power. It means by definition that you, the American people, all of us, the American people, will have less voice in the affairs of the nation. That's a terrible thing to happen in the United States.
We've got one more spicy topic to debate today. Coming up, Dylan Mulvaney made an appearance on The View. You won't want to miss our discussion of that. More Rising right after this. The debate around trans women participating in women's sports is far from over. After California Governor Gavin Newsom recently admitted on his podcast that it's a fairness issue, Whoopi Goldberg brought up the issue on The View. Let's watch.
There's been all of this debate about whether transgender athletes should be able to compete. And last week, California Governor Gavin Newsom said that he thinks that trans athletes competing in girls' and women's sports was deeply unfair. Now, I want to hear what you think.
Transgender activist Dylan Mulvaney, who sat with The View Monday, had this to say.
The last time I played a sport, I was 6 years old and I was on a soccer team, but I assigned myself as the nurse. So I sat with the Band-Aids. And so in the words of Wicked, I am not that girl. But a dear friend of mine, Skylar, he is a trans athlete. His handle's Pink Manta Ray. That's someone who I really look to for guidance. And I think that is what's tricky is like, now stepping in this identity, I'm still like a baby trans. You know, I've only 3 years in. Tomorrow's my anniversary.
But Whoopi further added to the discussion on transgender rights and participation in sports. Let's watch.
I think part of the problem that the trans community is facing, and it's the same problem that women face, is if you don't know anything about our bodies, you don't know how it works. So when you come in and you say, oh, you know, these are men, you know, competing against women, you're assuming that the women are weak and just can't do anything except be here. Have you seen female athletes? They know what they're doing. So I'm not sure what's going on or why this is an issue. The same for me as when people say, oh, you know, I don't know how I feel about you. You do. God doesn't make mistakes.
No.
And the challenge is not to the trans people, it's to the people who are not trans. That's what God is looking to see, how you treat people.
So in these clips that I saw on social media, I actually didn't particularly disagree with Dylan Mulvaney didn't say anything controversial. What Whoopi said didn't make a lot of sense to me. It's not about, I certainly agree with showing trans people respect and non-discrimination and all of that, absolutely. It is not being disrespectful or discriminatory to say that certain categories like women's sports, it just does not make sense to have people who would have certain biological advantages to be competing against cis women, to use that term, and that is an attitude that like 80% of Americans, including a vast majority of Democrats, hold, and it's not controversial. I don't know why the ladies of The View think that
I didn't know what she was talking about, and what she was talking about is the emotionality that she ascribed to the perception of some women. This is not an emotional issue, as you said. It's a biological issue. And the fairness should be based on that.
Yeah, the fairness is very important. Do you think, this issue has become so explosive recently. It gets talked about so much. We talk about it a lot. It's not like I'm obsessed with the issue, but it's something people do care about. And maybe it's not the biggest or most important thing, but that cuts both ways. Like I'll hear liberals say, why do you care so much about, there's a small number of trans women in women's sports outcompeting women. I'm like, well, yes, it's a small number of people, but if it's allowed to happen, the winner is going to be every time a trans person, that's going to matter to the those girls who compete. Athletes has something to do with acceptance to elite colleges and all of that. It matters to those families. If you're saying it's not an important issue, why are you fighting to the death to maintain the status quo, which so many people think is just very silly?
Well, on one hand, I am a kind of fundamentalist and a romantic when it comes to the Declaration of Independence. I do believe that the core mission of the United States, our mission statement is that document. All men are created equal. And so to me, as Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. However, I agree with you that what about justice for those girls on those teams?
Yeah.
And so I feel very strongly that trans Americans are equal in the eyes of God, therefore should be equal in the eyes of the law. And I don't understand why we are minimizing the very legitimate concerns of girls and their families who are trying to get ahead in sports in situations where, as you said, the issue is a biological advantage. And I think that we must seek to have, no pun intended, a fair playing field here for every American.
And just different accommodations where appropriate. Can there be, could there be a trans women league for whatever it is? Is there a and then in terms of like the facilities for young, I don't care about the public restrooms for adults, whatever, who cares? But for for locker rooms for younger people, and it can be a scary environment anyway for all sorts of reasons. Can we have more privacy and more accommodation so that everyone feels more comfortable? Seems perfectly reasonable to me without forcing men into women or women onto men.
Well, the privacy issue in terms of bathrooms, that to me is something very, very different, and I think is being used against trans Americans.
No, I agree to an extent for the bathrooms, but
as well, making those women, the
prison thing is difficult though, because that is the most obvious situation to me where someone could take advantage of now I'm a woman or now whatever in order to get themselves into a safer prison arrangement.
And equally concerning is what can happen to some of these trans women when they are transported into these male prisons. And I think that is equally of concern to me. In fact, more
that is a problem both ways.
I think that's a greater danger.
Well,
someone could legitimately have a sense that is a greater danger, whatever it is.
No, sir, that could absolutely be a danger. Yes, putting a trans woman in a man's prison, huge danger, but I could also see a man describing their gender identity as woman to get into the women's prison, which is
Why would somebody, wait, that makes no sense. Why would somebody, and then go commit
a man would rather be in a woman's prison than a man's prison.
Wait, a man would become trans and then say, I'm going to commit a crime?
No, you're misunderstanding me. No, you're misunderstanding. Not to commit a crime, to get out of the men's prison, because the men's prison is a much more dangerous and place prone to sexual abuse of men.
But that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that the president demanded the transfer of trans women from women's prisons into the male prisons, where they are afraid for their lives.
Right. To me, this is an obvious example for what I just said, a separate accommodation, a space for.
Well, you're not going to build a special prison for trans people.
You could have a cell. You could have a different cell block. You could have a different.
Well, I think they should be protected. If the president is going to demand that they must go to a man's prison, then absolutely they should have special protection, and that is what is apparently not happening. And I hope that something about our having a conversation here will bring that conversation up, because I'm very, very concerned. And some of the trans women who have been forced into the male prisons have expressed that they're afraid for their lives.
Just seems. No, I get that. It seems to me that common sense can prevail on this subject if people just talk about it the way we're talking about it now, and just apply just a little bit dignity and respect for everyone involved, but reasonableness, and that will be fine. And I think too much of that just doesn't take place on both sides, with a lot of with some very cruel opposition to trans people coming from the right, and some just really brain dead attitudes about what is a reasonable accommodation coming from not even the left necessarily, but liberals and progressives.
Well, we've become the disunited states of America. We have forgotten the first principle, e pluribus unum, out of many one. The richness of this country and the foundational principle of this country is that we are many kinds of people with different views, different ethnicities, different cultures, and now different sexes and sexual orientations and genders and all of that, but we are united by our fealty to certain common principles. And we are forgetting what those common principles are of fairness, of justice, of liberty for all. And that's what I feel we need to get back to, because when you discuss all these things within that context, then there is a both and. There is a yin and yang. There is a learning from one another. There is, as Eisenhower said, that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. So I'm glad that there are times when you and I can agree or learn from each other. I think that's as important as the times in which we spar.
I think we're having a lot of fun. I very much agree. And we're going to do it again tomorrow. Is that right? You're back with us tomorrow?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And we hope you're having fun too.
Yeah, we hope you're having fun as well. I think you are. That does it for us today on Rising. We will be back tomorrow. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. See you tomorrow.